The chains on my wrists were cold, but my hands were steady. Two guards pushed me forward through a doorway taller than any building I had ever seen, and the sound of my own footsteps echoed like thunder across a floor made of polished black stone. Thousands of eyes turned toward me. Every single one of them belonged to a creature that was not human. I was the only person from Earth in that entire hall. Rows of alien delegates knelt on either side of the long walkway, their heads bowed low, their bodies pressed flat against the ground. Some had scales that shimmered like oil on water. Some had forearms folded neatly in front of them. Some had no eyes at all, only sensors that pulsed faint blue light. None of them looked up at me. None of them dared. At the far end of the hall sat a throne carved from a single piece of dark crystal, glowing faintly from within, as if it held a fire that never went out. On that throne sat the Empress of the Threxian Dominion, ruler of 1,100 worlds, a being who had never once been refused in 10,000 years of rule. Her name was Veil Ashra, and when she rose from her throne, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "So this is the human," she said, and her voice rolled through the chamber like a wave crashing over stone. "The species that destroyed one of my warships, with nothing but a handful of ships and a stubborn refusal to surrender." I said nothing. I had learned, in the 3 days since my capture, that silence was often stronger than words. "You fought back," she continued, stepping down from the platform, her long robes trailing behind her like smoke. "No species has fought back in 3,000 years. Do you know what happens to species that fight back?" I did know. I had seen the images. Burned cities, empty skies, worlds turned to dust because they had dared to say no. "You are here," she said, stopping only a few steps away from me, "because I want to see this species with my own eyes before I decide its fate. Every world in this room learned the same lesson eventually. Kneel, and you survive. Kneel, and your children survive. Kneel, and I am merciful." She lifted one hand, and the guards released the chains from my wrists. They fell to the floor with a heavy sound that seemed to ring out forever in that silent hall. "Kneel, human," she said. I felt the weight of every eye in that room pressing down on me. I felt the weight of every human being back on Earth, all 8 billion of them, sitting on the other side of that command. If I knelt, maybe Earth would be spared the fire. If I refused, maybe I would die in front of 1,000 strangers, and Earth would burn anyway. But I thought about my father, who used to say that a person who bends their knee out of fear has already lost something that can never be given back. I stood a little straighter instead. A ripple of movement passed through the kneeling crowd, heads turning slightly, careful not to lift too high, careful not to draw attention. Nobody in that hall had ever seen a person offered mercy and refused to reach for it. "I will not kneel," I said. The words landed in that vast chamber like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment nobody moved, even the Empress seemed to freeze, as though she had misheard me, as though the very idea of refusal did not fit inside her mind. "You misunderstand," she said slowly, her voice losing some of its warmth. "This is not a request. Every delegate in this hall knelt before me. Every world you see represented here chose survival. They knelt because they were beaten," I said. "You broke their fleets, burned their cities, and then you offered them a choice between kneeling and dying. That is not mercy. That is fear wearing the mask of kindness." Somewhere behind me, one of the alien delegates let out a small, sharp breath, as if the words themselves were dangerous to hear. "And you believe your species is different," the Empress said. "I know we are," I answered. "We did not kneel to your warship either. We lost the battle. Half our fleet is gone, but we still said no. We would rather lose everything standing up than keep everything on our knees." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something in her expression that was not anger. It looked closer to confusion, the look of someone encountering a puzzle with no solution she had ever been taught. "You speak as though defiance is a virtue," she said. "It is not. It is simply a slower path to the same grave every other species has walked." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you have never met a species that fights not because it believes it can win, but because giving up was never in its nature to begin with." The hall stayed silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and even, though every instinct in my body was screaming that I had just signed my own death sentence. The Empress turned and walked slowly around me, studying me the way a person studies a strange insect they have never seen before. "Tell me why," she said. "Why would you choose pain over peace? Your world could be spared. Your people could live under my protection, safe from every threat in this galaxy. All I ask is 30 seconds of your pride." I thought carefully before I answered, because I understood this was the only chance I would get to speak for every person back home who could not speak for themselves. Because the moment I kneel, I said, you will believe you own us. You will tell every world in this hall that humanity bent the same way they did, and once you believe that, you will never offer us respect again, only orders. We would rather earn your fear than accept your leash. A murmur spread through the crowd, low and uncertain, like wind moving through dry grass. I saw a few of the kneeling delegates lift their heads slightly, just enough to look at me, just enough to remember what it felt like to stand. The Empress stopped in front of me again, closer this time, close enough that I could see my own reflection in the dark surface of her eyes. Every species that refused me before you is gone, she said quietly. Their worlds are silent now. You understand that, don't you? I am not bluffing when I say I could erase your planet before the sun rises there tomorrow. I understand, I said. But erasing us will cost you more than you think. We do not fight like the others did. We do not have one capital to burn, one fleet to break, one leader whose death ends the war. We are 8 billion separate reasons to keep fighting, scattered across a world you have never fully mapped. You can burn our cities, but you cannot burn an idea. And the idea that a person should never kneel out of fear, that idea will outlive every ship you send. For a long moment the Empress said nothing at all. The silence stretched so long that even her own advisors began shifting uncomfortably at the edges of the throne room, glancing at one another, unsure whether they were about to witness an execution or something else entirely. Finally she spoke, and her voice had changed. The fire in it had cooled into something quieter, something almost curious. In 10,000 years, she said, no one has spoken to me the way you just have. Every delegate in this hall learned that survival requires surrender. You are telling me survival requires something else. It requires respect, I said, not fear. You can rule an empire built on fear for a long time, but eventually, fear runs out of places to hide. Respect does not run out. Respect grows. She studied me for a long time, long enough that I began to wonder if she was searching for a reason not to end my life right there in front of everyone. Then, slowly, she turned toward the delegates kneeling on the floor around us. Rise, she said to them. A wave of confusion passed through the hall. None of them moved at first, as if the word itself did not make sense coming from her mouth. Then, one by one, hesitantly, they lifted themselves from the ground, unsure whether this was a trap or something new. The Empress turned back to me. I have ruled by one law for 10,000 years, she said. Kneel and live. You have shown me that law has a limit. A species that refuses to break may be more valuable standing beside me than crushed beneath me. Are you offering peace? I asked, or another test? I am offering a conversation, she said. Something I have never offered before. Sit with my council. Speak for your world, not as a prisoner, but as an equal. If your people can back your words with actions, perhaps this empire has room for a species that does not kneel. I felt the tightness in my chest begin to ease, just slightly, though I did not let it show on my face. I had walked into that hall expecting to die standing up. I never expected to walk out of it still breathing, let alone respected. On behalf of Earth, I said, I accept the conversation. But we will speak as equals, not as subjects. That is the only kind of peace we will ever agree to. The Empress almost smiled, though on her face it looked more like the shadow of an expression she had forgotten how to make. Equals, she repeated, testing the word as though it were unfamiliar in her mouth. Very well, human, equals. As the guards stepped aside and the doors at the far end of the hall slowly opened, I walked forward, past rows of delegates who were now standing instead of kneeling, their eyes following me the entire way. Word would spread across 1,000 worlds by morning, carried faster than any ship could fly, that a small, stubborn species from a small, stubborn planet had walked into the heart of an empire and refused to bow. And somewhere far behind me, on a world of blue oceans and green fields, 8 billion people would wake up not knowing that the fate of their planet had just been decided, not through surrender, but through a single quiet refusal to kneel.